Okay, here's something we all have in common. What's the one thing that every person you don't like has in common? I mean, it doesn't matter if you consider yourself a Jesus follower or not, there's one thing none of us like when we see it show up in someone else. And I'll let you percolate on that for a little bit before I give you my answer. And by the way, my name is Jarrod, and I'm glad you're with us here today. This is Journey at Home, and we're here because we find that following Jesus in our everyday lives makes everyday life better. We all want a better life. So stick around and explore with us what that looks like. Subscribe to the channel, tap the bell to get notifications, and then let us know if we can help. Okay, now that you're properly welcomed and you know who I am, let's get back to the common thing that shows up in all the people that we don't like. All right, so you might have come to the same conclusion I did. It's pride. Arrogant people are never wrong. They don't ask for forgiveness because they didn't do anything wrong, and they think you deserved what you got anyway. They somehow make everything about themselves and think they're better than you, all at the same time. And when we see pride show up in someone else, we all resist it. We want to get away from it. And what may surprise you to learn, especially if you're not a Jesus follower, is this. It says this in Scripture: God opposes the proud. I mean, and you do too. So you have something in common with God too. There's just something in all of us that resists wanting to be around or have anything to do with prideful people. We may have to work with them and sell to them and live with them, but we don't enjoy them. I mean, pride tends to create a distance and a feeling of disconnectedness. You can't even get very close to them because they can't be vulnerable and really connect with you. They're not self-aware because they're so self-absorbed. So they end up self-sabotaging any chance of a close relationship with you, which is really kind of scary. Proud and arrogant people don't even know they're proud and arrogant, which means I might be proud and arrogant and not be aware of it. But the guy who wrote this line that God opposes the proud, his name was Peter, and he was a friend of Jesus and wrote this years after Jesus' resurrection. And he mentions something else you have in common with God. It says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. And you do too, don't you? I mean, you love hanging out with humble people. You want to be married to a humble person, and you'll give a humble person a second chance to go the extra mile for them. You and God both lean away from the proud, but lean in towards the humble people. So I wonder how we can find people with more humility. That'd be great, wouldn't it? I mean, how can we be people with more humility so that people want to lean in toward us? I mean, that's what we've been working our way through this entire series that we've been calling Revolutionary, the empowering invitation of the cross. For most modern-day Christians, the cross represents a way of believing, but in the first century, the cross represented something far more powerful. It was a way of living, an invitation to a different, countercultural alternative, but not always intuitive way of life. I mean, if you missed the past 2 episodes, you can find them in our YouTube channel. But the whole series is exploring Jesus' new lose-win kind of game that's not common in our win-lose world. I mean, who wants to lose first? I mean, how could that possibly make my life better? But Jesus proved by losing, by surrendering, by yielding ourselves to God and His purpose, that's bigger and beyond yourself, you actually win. But the way of the cross requires humility. Humility is, man, it's just powerful. I mean, think about the last time you were in an argument and you're all mad and you're getting hot under the collar and suddenly the other person responds with humility. I mean, it kind of knocks you off balance, doesn't it? I mean, you expected pushback and you were ready for a fight and they were going to get defensive and you were about to get defensive, and humility didn't push back or strike back. Humility absorbs. And that's why when 2 people with humility have a conflict, pretty much any issue can be resolved. There's no pride to derail the progress of conflict resolution, which brings up a really interesting question for all of us. I mean, have you ever been tempted to be humble? I mean, of course not, because humility isn't a temptation to resist. It's a posture to adopt, and we all like it when we see it and experience it. So why wouldn't we all want to pursue it ourselves? And how would you do that? How would you chase humility if you wanted more of it? I mean, if you want a blueprint for pursuing humility, just look at Jesus. I mean, let's look at one specific example, although there are dozens we could use from what was written about his life. Maybe you've heard the story. There's a time when Jesus was he fed 5,000 men plus the women and children who were with him. I mean, with just a couple of fish and a few loaves of bread. I mean, Come on. That's an extraordinary miracle, and this story appears in all 4 of the accounts about Jesus' life. But our modern mindset assumes Jesus did this to bring attention to himself, right? Why else would you do it? Why, create a buzz. I mean, get people talking about me, right? That's how you gain popularity and power, but that's not Jesus' motivation at all. I mean, we know this because of the way these 4 different accounts present Jesus in this moment. I mean, and Jesus did miracles to show people that he really was who he claimed to be. And that's why he did miracles. Yeah, he did miracles to validate his identity as a God in human flesh, as the long-awaited Messiah, the King. That's why he did this miracle dinner. So look what Jesus does after this miracle. It says, after the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who has come into the world. I mean, these people are pumped. I mean, the Jewish people have been waiting thousands of years for this moment because they knew God had promised that a king would come and he would overthrow the powers that were oppressing them and he would restore them as a people. And their version of that story meant that a Jewish king would come and destroy the armies of the Romans that occupied Jerusalem at that time. So this big crowd, I mean, this is significant because 5,000 men is the same size as a Roman legion of soldiers. So this is a big moment, right? This miracle has turned everybody's thoughts to political and military means. They could start marching from where they were and go to Jerusalem. And by the time they got to the city, they could probably have picked up another 40 or 50,000 men to join them in this fight to take back their country, right? This could be the beginning of a true revolution. Except, here's what Jesus does next. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him a king by force, I mean, think of the temptation Jesus faces in this very moment. Like, it would truly be easy to just take this powerful, emotional speech, operate by the rules of this world, and do what he came to do by force and power and might. All the things that we try to do to make things right. And he's got some serious backup right here, right now. Blood's going to be shed for sure, but that's just how things worked back in those days. That's the way kings and kingdoms work. You wage war to control this and take power over that. But that's not the way of our king, the final king. Instead, it says Jesus said he withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Not because he didn't deserve the crown, but he didn't come to get that kind of crown and get it in that way. It was not his way. Instead of marching on Jerusalem, he marched to Jerusalem in order to give his own life away, to model the way of the cross, to model humility, to model surrender that ultimately leads to freedom. Instead of leading thousands of people to war, Jesus' last act in the city of Jerusalem before his arrest was to walk around the dinner table and wash the feet of his own disciples. I mean, think about the time it would take to do that. Wash, dry, wash, dry, wash, dry, 12 people's feet. The same feet that would soon be running away in fear and leave him to be questioned and beaten and alone to be crucified. He did that for them. He did what we all expect slaves to do. It was truly a remarkable display of humility. The most powerful man in the room washed the feet of cowards, deniers, and a traitor in their midst. And then he submitted himself to be arrested, flogged, beaten, and crucified. And not once did he leverage his power for his own benefit. Instead, he leveraged it for our benefit. And while everyone watching was sure he was a big loser, they didn't realize that Jesus was fully committed to winning in that moment. He was different. He was competing for a different kind of prize. I mean, he wasn't just trying to win in the traditional ways of our world where pride and ego and selfishness and power grabs the crown. He was winning by the way of the cross, and in the process, he was ushering in a brand new kingdom ruled through humility. He was competing for you. Jesus' humility brought you forgiveness, freedom, salvation, and an invitation into God's family. He's the king who, through the way of the cross, he reversed the order of everything. So, in light of what Jesus did, what would it look like for you to choose that kind of humility? I mean, there's always a choice, and your king set the bar and then invited you to pursue that life of humility. What would it look like for you to take that chance, to pursue this risky path of humility, because it may or may not work out in your favor? What would it take to chase that kind of humility? To look for opportunities when you could serve others, to go to the back of the line, to put everyone else in front of you and give somebody else the credit. When you choose it and you chance it, you end up chasing a life of humility. You're going to discover that some feet don't really deserve to be washed. And you'll wash them anyway without anyone watching and without anyone giving you credit for it. But in those moments, you'll find yourself changed for the better. Because God opposes the proud, but he gives favor to the humble. I mean, God cheers on the humble. God comes to the aid of the humble. God leans in close to the humble. And he's got their back. So what are you going to do? Will you chase humility? Not just sit back and passively wait for an opportunity to be humble, but really get out there and chase humility this week. I mean, would you intentionally pursue a life that Jesus modeled, leveraging your power and your resources and your time and your energy for the benefit of the other people? Will you give your life away to serve and put them first? I mean, this kind of humility will change you for the better. I mean, think about if we as a church just did this. We would change our communities because they would see a group of people not trying to compete for status or power or awards. Instead, they would see us competing for them. So choose it, chance it, and chase it this week. It's a new step toward a life that's truly revolutionary.